Noon going, and we are going to kick it off with a topic that is probably doesn't need much introduction: subscriptions. Everybody is talking about it. I mean, in every facet of our lives, we're sort of, inundated with recurring revenues and subscriptions, whether you subscribe to music, subscribe to, Netflix, everything is moving towards subscriptions. Obviously, in the B2B world, that is very much a part of what a lot of us are wrestling with when we take on a lot of these transformation projects. And one of the companies that knows a lot about subscription and billing is Aria. And we are fortunate enough to be joined by their founder and chief innovation officer, Brendan O'Brien. And he's going to talk to us about the subscription wave, which apparently is becoming a subscription tsunami. He knows about this a lot more than probably most people in the world can. So, Brendan, the floor is yours.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, there we go. When Heather Patel said, hey, would you come speak at Licensing Live? I said, absolutely. I have exactly two conditions, Heather. Number one, make sure I come after Ray Wang, because that guy is really boring, and I want to make sure I light up the room. And number two, I demand to come after lunch. I only want people that are in a food coma, because a food coma is exactly the right zeitgeist in which to start talking about billing. So thank you so much, Heather. Really appreciate it. Hi, I'm Brendan. Let's get going here. Let me start with a hopefully brief little infomercial about Aria. Not that I'm trying to sell it to you, but because I just want to give you sort of my viewpoint of the world. We call ourselves the standard for modern billing, and we do so not pretty much, but exclusively in the subscription and recurring revenue world, and we'll talk about what I really mean by that. But in this world, there are certain things that a modern billing system, as opposed to the monolithic on-premise things that a lot of us are very accustomed to, need to bring to bear. Among them, obviously, it needs to be agile. When I say agile, what I really mean is that power is put in the hand of the business user to make constant iterative change. Nothing is set in stone in this world, billing certainly not among them, and we want to make sure that business users can make changes on the fly and not have to introduce and harm coders in the effort of getting new products out the door. Obviously, we're a cloud-based solution, and customer centricity is a really critical pillar in our thinking. Billing is thought of as a transactional thing, but in a recurring world, understanding your customer, keeping your finger on the pulse of your customer is, we believe, the key to success. So we designed our platform around these tenets. It's time for a polling question. And I love these polling questions, by the way. What a great idea. So let's start off. Does your business have some form of recurring revenue or subscription model in place? So basic subscriptions, what I mean by that is, people you charge them a flat amount per month for an all-they-can-eat buffet for your service. There's also usage-based models, meaning there is some variable component that's embedded into bills based on what they did during using your service during a prior period. Do you have combinations of the two? Do you have nothing? And if you have nothing, do you have plans to have something? And if so, what? Or if not? So there's your question. Let's see how that shakes out. Fantastic. And this does add up to 100%, yes? Okay. All right. Great. So clearly the majority are either in it or are en route. We do have 20% that are saying you're not going there at all. So this is reflective of what we're seeing overall in terms of trends in the industry. I'll get to the trends in just a second. Let me just kind of finish out where Aria tends to sit in the world. So we kind of break apart billing and all the things that are adjunct to billing, that billing needs to talk to, that need to talk to billing, into these sort of general functional areas. And we group ourselves as what we think of as the important middle office. Yes, this is our requisite, we're the heart of your ecosystem slide that everybody has. But these white boxes are functional areas that we see as primarily, if not solely, our responsibility. The light gray boxes beside them are things where we have some kind of shared responsibility, and the dark gray boxes are the systems around us that we need to either feed or feed us, but they're pretty decoupled from us. I'm going to come back to this slide a little bit later when I kind of weave in the Aria plus Gemalto story. So this is just to give you a preview. That's ARIA. So let's talk about the subscription wave. First of all, let's look at it from a B2C standpoint. I'm bringing up sources, so it's not just me blithering on, but McKinsey released this study this past year, and these are some pretty compelling numbers. 60% in the B2C world, 60% of B2C retailers view subscription as absolutely critical strategically to what they are doing. Of all consumers, half of them in the last year purchased some net new thing via a subscription model. And that net new thing could be digital or physical in nature. So these numbers, these charts apply to both things like Netflix, obviously a digital service that you're subscribing to for a flat rhythmic fee, and also to a Dollar Shave Club or some kind of a perfume of the month subscription, right? So physical boxes delivered on a cadence or digital services delivered on a cadence. The same thing applies. Massive growth in all things subscription related. Now, if we look at the B2B world, it's slightly different, but there are clearly some parallels. In the B2B world, the things that drive what you can think of as subscription or more broadly recurring revenue tend to be focused or driven more than anything else by things like platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. Look at one of these numbers is really the one that kind of jumps out at me is in 2017, SaaS grew. Just in 2017, SaaS grew by 31%. And platform and infrastructure as a service grew by a whopping 47%. These are incredible, incredible numbers. This is not a trend. This is absolutely here. Now, whether we're talking about B2C or B2B, I guess it might be important for you to understand again why I care. Why do we, Aria and Gemalto, care? And it begins with this statement. All revenue aspires to be recurring in nature. I believe this, not merely because I'm paid to believe it, but because it is absolutely reflected in everything that I see and touch all of the time. Whether it is from the viewpoint of the shareholder, from the viewpoint of the C-level executive, or from the viewpoint, importantly, of the customer, people are gravitating, companies are gravitating more and more and more to having this tethered, ongoing relationship with the companies that provide them goods and services. Whether we're talking about box of the month subscriptions, X as a service, et cetera, all of these things demand capabilities that basically monolithic on-premise legacy systems simply were not built to handle. I'm clicking and nothing's happening. There we go. And if we look at what I mean by not built to handle, and we look at a system like ours, and we're not the only one, but billing systems that are designed for this purpose, what do they bring to the table that a lot of these systems lack, either in whole or in part? One, they understand the fundamental nature of what it is to do something rhythmically. Doing something rhythmically, by the way, is not necessarily just lather, rinse, repeat on a single transaction. There's obviously a lot more to it than that. It needs to be automated. That seems obvious, right? But you wouldn't believe how many companies we walk into and somebody in the room, when they're understanding what we do, raises their hand and says, what button do I press to do my payments run or my billing run? And the answer is, you don't. You don't do that. Stop thinking that way. This should be something that runs in a lights-out manner. It needs to be that, or you're not going to gain the efficiencies that you clearly seek. It needs to be variability tolerant. So what I mean by variability tolerant is really the line between subscription and usage or consumption-based models. A subscription, by its definition, its technical definition is it's rhythmic, but it's flat. My Netflix subscription is precisely that. It is a subscription. I'm billed whatever it is, $11.95 on the 17th of every month, and I get an all-I-can-eat buffet of all the service that Netflix has to offer. But if I want to be able to flex and address the widest possible market, depending on what you deliver, many of your customers will demand some kind of a pay-per-drink model. They will want variability. It's still rhythmic in nature. I'm still getting a bill generated on some day of the month or the quarter or the year, but that bill is at least partially reflective of actually what I did. It is able to deal with variability. It needs to be able to be change tolerant. People upgrade, downgrade, cancel, add on, et cetera, during the course of their lifetime, and you need to be able to flex both from a transactional standpoint and a provisioning and entitlement and licensing standpoint with all of those potential changes that will occur during a customer's life cycle. And it also has to be exception tolerant. There are customers that say, here are the 1,700 different products that we offer. Don't ask me what the rack rate pricing is for any of them because everything's individually negotiated. Everything's an exception. Whether you're at that extreme or not, you have to have systems that are able to gracefully absorb those kinds of exceptions. So those are the things that a modern billing system in this recurring and subscription world needs. Well, guess what? If I ask the same question of what does a modern licensing entitlement usage management system need to be able to offer in this world, it is exactly the same basic stuff, right? And by the way, this is the real source of the simpatico that exists between, legitimately exists, by the way, between my company and Gemalto. In terms of monetization, I talked about subscription. This kind of breaks it down a little bit better. Recurring billing breaks not just into subscription, they are not synonymous. Subscription is a subset of the broader umbrella term called recurring revenue. At the end of the day, it's not all that hard to understand, right? It's not all that necessarily difficult to swipe a card or produce a bill for a predicted amount on a predicted day at a predicted cadence. But things become complex when you need to start adding into that what I loosely call one-time purchases, call them ad hoc, out of band, anything that occurs in a sporadic or arrhythmic way. But the real complexity comes in with things involving usage or consumption. The measurement, however you measure the service or services that you deliver, that's usage, that's consumption. And whether you choose to bill for it or not, I would say it's extremely important to understanding and growing your business. And if you do choose to bill for it, guess what? There are a lot of different ways to bill for it. If you think about all the various forms of cell phone bills that you have had over your life, you've seen a lot of these different models, right? There's pooling, flat rate per tier, volume discounting. I won't get into what all these geeky terms mean, but suffice it to say, it is not merely unit times rate equals a number. There's a lot of potential nuance to that. And your market is going to have customers that are going to demand a lot of these nuances. And of course, none of this operates in a vacuum. You need to be able to flex all these different pricing and billing models in a world of multiple geographies, multiple currencies, multiple channels that you sell through, multiple discount structures that overlay on top of your core price book. Making sure that you're insulated against all these changes is critical to making sure you future-proof your business. Let me ask a question, not a polling question. I probably should have made it one, but shout out your answer. Can anybody tell me, approximately is fine, how many customers the Gap has? Does anybody know? How many customers does the Gap have? Just shout out numbers. Anyone? Yeah, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea what the answer to that question is. But what I can tell you is the key word there is the word is, right? Or has, present tense. How many customers does the Gap currently have? The answer to the question, I would say, is the number of people at this exact moment who are currently in a Gap store in the process of buying whatever it is that they're buying. That is the actual number, because the Gap is not intrinsically a recurring business. And by definition, my definition at least, that means that the number of customers they present tense have is limited to that number and that number alone. The difference between a business like that and a recurring business is that a recurring business affords you the use of the present tense. The present tense as in, this is my customer, not was my customer. If I walk to the Gap and I buy a sweater and I check it out the moment I walk out the door, I was a customer. And the Gap's job, like any other non-recurring business, is to match customer acquisition with subsequent customer reacquisition, to gain me back as a customer. They can do it through credit card promotions or coupons or whatever it is that they do, capture my email, fine, but those are all reacquisition strategies. A recurring business doesn't do reacquisition per se, it does retention. You gain your customer once and your job is to keep that customer. What I suggest here is that the way that you do that, retain your customers, is to elevate customer satisfaction. And the way that you elevate customer satisfaction is by keeping your pulse on all the things that happen in their life cycle beyond the bills. Look at this little constellation of events in the lower left-hand corner. is the basic blocking and tackling of billing. I figure out how much you owe, I swipe a credit card, I give you a receipt, I'm done. Well, if it were merely that, I wouldn't be standing on the stage and I'd be doing something very different for a living, no doubt. But the importance is making sure that yes, you have those important transaction milestone markers, but knowing all the things that happen and reacting to them is going to give you all the tools you need to keep that customer sat level high, which will in turn keep your retention high. When I showed you this slide earlier, I wanted to just point out this little piece right here. This little piece is not little at all. A billing system needs to be able to be intrinsically tied to the system that delivers the service for which a customer is being billed. And there needs to be a feedback loop. I call it usage mediation here, the little telco term, but there needs to be measurement of the service as it was delivered, even if it is an all-I-can-eat buffet. My Netflix bill doesn't change based on how many movies I watch, but there's an army of people at Netflix that are looking at my usage patterns and my usage patterns of my cohort very carefully, because that's going to inform them of how to create new product, new content. It's going to inform them of how to make recommendations for me. It's going to inform you, if you measure usage even if you don't bill for it, it's going to inform you about the product management choices that you're going to be making in the future. Let's talk about the role of IoT in all of this. That's a weird jump, Brendan. Well, maybe it is, but let's start with a polling question. Are you pursuing an IoT strategy? Or do you have plans to pursue an IoT strategy? You guys can read that, and I guess you guys throw up the results on the screen automatically. I don't click for that? Okay. Let's see. Yes and no. All right. Okay. All right. Fantastic. Fantastic. I like where this is headed. Okay, great. I think that given the 75% of you that are hardware-based in some form or other, based on Shlomo's earlier survey question, leads me to believing that this would be the case. I would suggest that if you did answer no, you are probably going to be wrong in the not-too-distant future. Connectivity of physical devices to a network in order to provide secondary value-add services, or to offer that same physical piece of hardware as a service itself, is going to be endemic to all industries. So let's dive into that a little bit. IoT equals recurring revenue. This is why I care about it. When you take a physical thing and you connect it to a network and it provides some additional service, and that service is perpetual in nature and it tethers the provider to the customer, that lends itself, if to be monetized, lends itself to a recurring revenue monetization structure. Whether we're talking about wearables, consumer wearables, whether we're talking about vehicles, either vehicles that are offered vehicle as a service or vehicles that you buy in a traditional sense but have some collection of value-add services, these are all IoT applications. Homes, connected security, smart locks, etc., and of course industrial applications. By the way, one of the industrial applications that we support is the Philips medical scanning machines that Ray Wang referred to. Those pay-per-scan machines are actually running on our platform. The things that these all share in common is that they require a tethering to the end customer, and the systems that are going to support that likely don't exist because the companies that brought these products to market tend to be thing makers. An automobile manufacturer is just that, an automobile manufacturer. They know how to make big things with wheels that are made out of iron and sell them through a dealer network. What do they know? They don't even know who their customers are. That's the bitter truth of being an automobile manufacturer. Well, you put connectivity in that vehicle and you provide connected services. Whether or not you charge for them, I now, as an automobile manufacturer, have direct line of sight to my customer. I've never enjoyed that before. And that is a data stream that is going to be a lot more valuable over time than whatever margin I made on the physical device itself. If there's one piece of advice that I could give those of you who are in the hardware business, especially those of you who are or embarking on or in the midst of an IoT strategy, start thinking in terms of looking at your hardware, from wearable to giant multi-million-dollar scanning machine, as a barrier to entry. Look at that as a barrier to entry for your customers. They need to get past whatever pain it required to get that thing so that you can get them tethered to you and delivering that perpetual recurring service. So IoT is growing, but it hasn't really done what people said it was going to do by 2020. If I look at these two numbers, the first one is Cisco. This is the number of connected devices that will be in place by 2020. 50 billion, that's a big number. Look at Gartner last year, it's now revised down to 20 billion. And there are lots of reasons why IoT hasn't had the uptake that it has. There are a lot of barriers in place, societal barriers, legal barriers, and these are legitimate concerns. But if there's one technical barrier that has suppressed, that has dampened overall IoT adoption, it is the availability, ubiquity, and speed of connectivity. Using that connected car example before, if I am a BMW and I want to roll out a connected service, I see it, Heather, thank you very much, 5 minutes. And I want to roll out my connected vehicle capabilities, the phone call that I'm going to make is going to be to an AT&T or a Verizon or a T-Mobile, and I'm going to get a bunch of SIM cards from them, and I'm going to plug them into my cars, and great, I'm off and running, but I've got the built-in limitation of only operating on those networks. And by the way, if I hit a dead spot, there's literally nothing at that point in time. So there are built-in limitations around fundamental connectivity. That's, I would say, the largest technical barrier to overall IoT adoption. Which brings me, finally, to the coming 5G tsunami. So everybody at this point has heard 5G. You're in Silicon Valley. I think I saw 7 5G billboards coming up the 101 yesterday. But this is extremely real. And if you just think of 5G as like some incremental improvement, I would suggest you're probably wrong. 5G, the adoption of the standard took place last year. It is the next generation in cellular mobile technology. It is orders of magnitude. It is not incremental. Orders of magnitude broader in its footprint, faster overall, lower in latency, higher reliability than the current 4G LTE standard. And it's not that long ago that we all remember that thing coming out and thinking it was great. It is not only going to supplant the 4G LTE networks that we enjoy today, it's going to supplant Wi-Fi. It's going to supplant wired connectivity. It is going to be faster than this hotel Wi-Fi, faster than the Ethernet cable plugged into your machine. That's literally what it is going to do once the footprint is actually out there. And mobile manufacturers are already well on their way here. Verizon's made an announcement. Pretty much by the end of 2020, every single global large mobile provider is going to have some kind of 5G footprint in place. 5G will take IoT to the next level. So if we quickly go through the history of it, 1G introduced cell phones. Think, by the way, as I list these things, the cascading consequences to all of our lives that resulted from each of these introductions. Cell phones, right? Period. 2, with 2G, you had secure cell phone transmission, and you had the ability to send and receive text messages, critical part of all of our lives. 3G introduced the real use of data transmission over phones. Where would we be without that? 4G introduced an expansion on data transmission, which enabled high-definition streaming. Think about all the content that you simply couldn't get, that would be insufferable to deal with if it weren't for 4G. Well, 5G takes this to an entirely new planet. You will be able to have 10x the transfer rate. Very importantly, you will have extremely low latency. Latency being the time between a request to the network and a response from it. With that super low latency, you will be approaching what is actually going to be real-time ability to react to data conditions. If I think about the things that are going to be possible as a result of this, quickly. Sorry, not clicking. Clicking. Autonomous vehicle control. We all heard about autonomous vehicles, but autonomous vehicles that are partially or wholly controlled remotely, or where there's some kind of monitoring that is remote, well, that doesn't really work if you hit dead spots in a network. It just doesn't. It doesn't really work if there has to be an immediate reaction to an accident that just occurred 1 second ago around the corner and out of your line of sight. If there's latency in the network, that is an application that simply cannot function. What about remote robotic surgery? If the world's greatest surgeon for brain surgery is a continent away, and you want access to that for legitimate medical care purposes, he may not get on a plane, she may not get on a plane to service you, but if she can do so remotely in a low latency environment where literally her exact movements are immediately reflected in the surgery, that opens up an entire new world. There are whole new business models, all of which, again, lend themselves to a recurring model that will be enabled. It's not just an incremental improvement. So I am wrapping up. 1, 5G will massively accelerate IoT applications across the board. And again, IoT applications lend themselves to recurring revenue models. If you're wondering, well, I'm not IoT based and why is this important to me? The rest of the world follows where connectivity follows. As these recurring revenue models, driven largely, at least in part by IoT, become greater, enjoy greater and greater adoption, so go the rest of the world. IoT applications that have never been seen before will arrive, and they again will be subscription and or consumption based. And you will need new stacks to be able to support that kind of capability. And if you come from the thing-making world, there should be a moment of self-examination to ask yourself if you actually have the infrastructure and the sociology to support it. And I think that is all I've got. I'm only 2 minutes over. Thank you.